the tricky thing about endometriosis, and 1 in 10 women have it, which is a crazy number because 1 in 10 men have erectile dysfunction and there are like 25 drugs for it.
Of course there are, right? Of course.
1 in 10 women. I mean, think of your 10 friends. Like everyone knows someone that has endometriosis. And it takes an average of 10 years to be diagnosed. Women see 8 doctors because women's pain is often not believed.
Welcome to High on Self-Care. I'm your host, Stacey Zeal, yoga teacher, crystal lover, high-functioning stoner, and CEO of MaryZeal.com, a community for stoners who love cannabis and are looking to prioritize their self-care. On this podcast, we'll explore ways that meditation, mindfulness, yoga, and of course, all things weed can help you to elevate your self-care. We'll explore ways to truly value ourselves, use stillness for self-discovery, and cannabis to go higher on our journey. Think of me as your sister stoner who lovingly encourages you to prioritize yourself and reap the benefits of this magical plant. If you're ready to create a life that holds space for your most valuable asset, that's you, by the way, take a deep breath, light your J, and let's dive in. Hey, High on Self-Care listeners. Welcome back. I have another awesome guest for you today. We're going to be talking about all the things. I'm just going to go ahead and let her introduce herself and tell us a little bit about who she is, what she does, and we'll get into the interview. So welcome to the show, Ellen. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
I am Ellen Scanlon. I am the host and co-creator of How to Do the Pot, which is an audio-first education platform demystifying cannabis for women. And we have a podcast called How to Do the Pot that is answering all of the questions that women secretly Google about weed.
I love that. Because I come across people who are always kind of, some people are either like super shy about their cannabis use, or some people are like me, we're like loud and proud, have your podcast like us. We're like, we do the pot. Okay. So let's just tell everybody how to do the pot. So tell me a little bit about your background in kind of like, how did you get into cannabis and how did it become such a big part of your life that you decided to create an entire platform helping women to learn how to do it?
Sure. Well, I got my medical card. I live in San Francisco and I got my medical card in 2016. And that for me was a pretty big deal because I just started to pay a lot more attention to what was going on and what the opportunity was going to be. I am from the East Coast. I actually went to high school in Bethesda. So for some of your Maryland listeners, I went to University of Virginia. I worked on Wall Street for many years. I got my MBA at UVA also and moved out to California in 2009. And I've been working in financial services and investments, and really I had a fascinating experience. I worked on a trading floor for many years, so super fast paced. And then I worked for a firm that managed money for endowments and foundations. So perpetual capital, where these, organizations want to stay around forever. And so really different investment styles. And when I moved out to California, I was for the first time really exposed to a lot of people who were working for startups. And I just got the bug. It's just, I didn't know it, but it's very much my personality to just want to be touching everything and trying to make an impact. And so after a few years working for financial services firms, I went out on my own. I started consulting with brands that were actually focused on the natural and organic personal care space. And through that, I just ended up meeting a lot of women entrepreneurs. I was consulting with them, with the founders, trying to help them figure out how to grow their businesses, and started working for a women's healthcare company. And it sounds kind of crazy, but I'd worked in these male-dominated industries for so long, I just hadn't really thought about women as different. And for the first time at this company, I started to realize all of the challenges that women face, especially in healthcare. And one of the reasons that women look for alternatives is because they're just not being served very well. There's a study that came out last year from Berkeley and University of Chicago that women are massively overdosed with prescriptions. And what ends up happening is the side effects are just so much stronger for women than they are for men. They may get relief, but the side effects are stronger. So that was sort of brewing in my head. That was what I was learning at this startup. And I reconnected with a friend from college, April Pride, who had founded a cannabis company and sold it to a Canadian company. And she was working in Canada leading up to legalization, focused on the women's market. And we started talking and realized we were trying to solve the same problems for women. And so about that time also, I was trying to have a baby. That's when I discovered that I had endometriosis at like in my late 30s after having terribly painful periods and a lot of issues for a long time. And so I had this health experience that I just couldn't believe I didn't know about. I'd been seeing doctors regularly. So all of these things were kind of coming together, and I ultimately was able to have a baby. I have a 3-year-old son now. And when he was about 8 months old, April and I came together and decided that we really wanted to try and solve this problem for women in the US. And we felt like the most modern way to reach women was through a podcast, because you can talk and you can hear, our voices, and you have a podcast, so you get the strength of the connection. And we just felt like with weed, you kind of need a friend to help you out. A trusted voice is something that's really valuable, because for many of us, me included, I definitely grew up under war on drugs propaganda and was scared. And I think a lot of women still have that residual fear, whether it's fear of what might happen if you take the cannabis to your body, what might happen to you legally, what might happen if you have children. They're just a huge number of questions. And so we set out to try and solve those in a very practical way. And our episodes are short. I think about weed all the time, but I know that most women don't. And so we want our episodes to be that moment in your week when you learn something that helps you out, and then you can make whatever decision is right for you about cannabis.
I love that. I love that. So many things that you said, and like needing a friend to help you out. That's one of the reasons I kind of started this podcast too. And I love that that's how to do the pod started, because it really does take someone telling you that it's okay, like a friend that's saying like, what, it's okay. Because even in your head, like I remember when I started kind of going down that road of sleeping pills don't work. Now I need to try something different because I've tried all the things. And, that few months between when I decided, okay, well, when I saw that weed was a good option for my insomnia, to actually going into the dispensary, it was a good amount, a couple months, because I had the same kind of fears that you were alluding to. Like I had a job that did randoms. I was like, well, what if I lose my job? And what if, and I don't really know I knew what weed was. I had been around people who smoked weed. And so I didn't have necessarily a negative connotation to it. I just didn't do it. I hadn't smoked, and I didn't realize that it could help me in any kind of way. I just thought people were just doing it just because they like to smoke weed. And so but it takes I remember for me, it took my partner just saying like, just try it. Like, what's the worst that can happen? You lose your job. You don't even like your job anyway, right? I was trying to get a new job anyway. So I really didn't care, when I really thought about it. So that is so interesting. I love that. And, you talked a little bit about, like, how women are over medicated, over prescribed, and the side effects are such bigger. That's so interesting to me. Can you talk a little bit about where you kind of see that happening? Is that stuff for like pain relief, or is that the same? Does that also come up into things when you are getting treatments for like endometriosis and other women's health kind of issues?
I can speak personally for me. I have definitely been over medicated and suffered the side effects. I'm a pretty small person. I've always been thin, and I'm definitely on the smaller side of sort of your average woman. And most of the prescription drugs that are out there are tested on like 6 foot tall, 200-pound men. And so I'm definitely not that. And I had a bike accident about 10 years ago, and I was down in New Orleans for Jazz Fest and fell off of a bike. I broke 16 of my teeth. I tore up my shoulder. I broke ribs. I broke my wrist, all kinds of things. And I ended up going to the emergency room, and at the emergency room, they gave me some painkillers, which I took because at that time, and really up until not very long ago, I would take whatever doctors told me to do. I was
Mhm.
extremely obedient. And I came home and I actually ended up passing out. I fell off of the chair. I hit my head. I got a concussion. I subsequently had a very long journey of trying to heal myself. And if you've ever experienced any dental pain, it's terrible. And for each broken tooth, it's about 3 appointments, and I could not take opioids. They just made me super
Mhm.
sick. And so I was taking a lot of Advil, not knowing that that was probably tearing up my stomach. And
Mm.
I just had all kinds of complications that never occurred to me because I wasn't doing anything that seemed out of the ordinary. I was just trying to solve my pain. I wasn't taking tons of prescriptions, but I had several years. I still deal with the ramifications of some of the challenges that happened to me during that time. And then I stepped into the fertility industrial complex, which is a whole nother women's health area that I had no experience with, and the very strong drugs that you're taking. And I just have started to realize that what I thought was something that I could just kind of take and no big deal and everything's fine, it's hard for me when I take drugs. You were just saying that you have bronchitis. I was thinking years ago, I used to just take a Z-Pack and I'd be
Mhm.
fine. And I took a Z-Pack a year or two ago and it knocked me out for like a week. So I don't know if I'm just more aware or if I take fewer things and so they have a stronger impact on me. But the study from the University of Chicago and Berkeley is out there. Drugs are optimized from the very beginning to work on male bodies, and I talk to women all the time who are dealing with extreme side effects from all kinds of prescriptions. And the thread for me is that cannabis solves a lot of these problems related to pain, related to many different things, as well as the drugs that are out there, but it just does it without side effects.
Yeah, I think that's such a big thank you so much for giving us all that information because I'm just like, oh my goodness, like this is I felt what you were saying when you were saying you were following the doctor's orders, you were like following the rules because that's what I felt like I was doing too when I went from like I started with like melatonin and cutting caffeine and all that kind of stuff. Then I was like, okay, well that didn't work. Let me go to a doctor and see what, follow the rules, go to the doctor. And he gives me these sleeping pills. And after like a week and a half, I'm like, well, this isn't working that well. And then he said, well, you should take them for 2 weeks and then not take them for 2 weeks. And I'm like, well, that's not really a solution to my problem. Like, that's just you giving me a bunch of like, I just thought that was just weird advice, very weird advice. And that kind of just turned me off. But like, I can definitely see how, if you don't kind of see that holistic options are out there or you don't see that there are natural options that you can try, how you easily just get into like, okay, well, that's what the doctor said because they're a doctor, they're paid to, I'm paying them to give me to give me their diagnosis and I'm trusting their advice. So that's just it's so interesting, and I love that you have like kind of that inside knowledge about it from working at the startup and being in that space. It's such a great perspective that I hadn't really honestly considered, that we were just kind of following the rules and that's what we were just supposed to do.
I talked to some amazing women, and the two stories that stand out to me, we have episodes on autoimmune diseases, and I talked to a woman that has Crohn's disease and a woman that has lupus. And I felt the same way when I talked to them. They were doing every single thing that the doctors told them, but not only were they not getting better, they were feeling so much worse. They were feeling suicidal, and that's actually what led both of them to find cannabis, because they were kind of like, whatever, I mean, there's a
Yeah.
great story when one of the women on the show was like, I thought I was going to die. So I just started partying
Mhm.
and started smoking weed. And then I would realize that it would actually make me feel so much better. And so
Yeah.
that's what started her on starting to consider cannabis as medicine, which it seems crazy. I've been working in this industry. I believe in the plant, and still sometimes I will have some issue, and my first thought is, I should call the doctor. What should I do? What should I do? And I am not trying to disparage doctors at all. And we have doctors and nurses on our show who know a lot about mainstream medicine and a lot about cannabis. And I absolutely think that talking to them is an essential part of getting to your end result, and trying to solve your problems. But doing it without thinking is what I was doing, and without considering how it was what it was going to do for me. And that's what I'm trying to at least offer up an option for women. I hope that women don't have to get to the end of their rope, where they're just willing to try anything, but that seems to be a pattern that I see.
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of very relevant for me right now, because like I just went to, like we were talking about before we started, like I have bronchitis right now. And so I went to the doctor, just like, you're supposed to do. And he's like, oh yeah, you have bronchitis. He gives me 3 prescriptions. And I'm like, okay. So I take my little bag. I go home. I'm like, great, it's going to fix my problem. So I go and I'm starting reading through everything. And I'm like, okay, this is for inflammation. This is for 2 things. Like one thing was for inflammation. One thing was for a nasal decongestant for like kind of clear my nasal passages. And the other one was an inhaler to help me breathe. And the inhaler to help me breathe is great. But I was just kind of looking at the actual steroid that was what they gave me to help me with the inflammation. And I'm just like, well, if weed helps with my inflammation, maybe I should try that instead of trying, to put a steroid in my body, because, I know that what I'm doing is treating the symptoms, right? Like I'm not actually curing the bronchitis, because when I'm in my research is saying it's just going to go away on its own. It's like a cold. It's just going to go away on its own. But here, these things will help you to manage the symptoms. And so I really kind of just, now that I am a cannabis user and now that I know the powers of it, I'm just like, well, let me see if I can find something else that's going to help me with the inflammation in the meantime, since it's not curing my bronchitis, it's just helping me to deal with it. And so I really hope that, women kind of take away from our listeners and take away from this conversation, is that, that there are, it is right to go to your doctor, right? I like you said, I'm not disparaging anybody from going to a doctor. Go to a doctor, see your doctor. But then maybe have that little extra bit of mindfulness, that little extra thought where you're saying like, if this is supposed to help me with pain relief, like, is there something else that I can do to help me with pain relief, right? This is not actually helping me to, it's not curing my broken bone. It's just helping me to be able to manage it. Is there something else that's natural that I can actually use to get there? So I love that's such great advice to kind of just have that second thought to just say, is this right? Like, what is it for me? So one of the things that we talked about when we talked before is that you talked about how you have endometriosis. And I would love for you to kind of give us an idea of, like, for us out there who don't really know what endometriosis is, like, what is it and how does that present itself in women?
Endometriosis is an often painful disease where the endometrial tissue that is supposed to be in your uterus goes to your other organs and goes to other places. And what that means is that it leaves your body, but it's not leaving from the place where it's supposed to. So it is so much more painful than just your average cramps. The tricky thing about endometriosis, and 1 in 10 women have it, which is a crazy number, because 1 in 10 men have erectile dysfunction, and there are like 25 drugs for it.
Of course there are, right? Of course.
1 in 10 women. I mean, think of your 10 friends. Like,
yeah.
Everyone knows someone that has endometriosis. And it takes an average of 10 years to be diagnosed. Women see 8 doctors because women's pain is often not believed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Very sad, maddening, all of those things. But the really tricky part about endometriosis is that it has a very wide variety of symptoms. And there is an incredible website and a book called Know Your Endo by an endometriosis advocate named Jessica Mernan that I cannot recommend enough. But I just went through and I'm going to give you a list of all the things just so that you can see how varied they are. So painful periods is the one that most people kind of connect with endometriosis, and that is what I experience. And I think that is a common symptom, but it can include fatigue, leg pain, shoulder pain, hip pain, urinary issues, GI issues, which is really something to keep in mind because most women don't go to their doctor for GI issues, to their gynecologist for GI issues. Painful urination, painful diarrhea, painful sex, bloating, nausea, and infertility. And studies show that up to 50% of unexplained infertility is often due to endometriosis. And so women like me who are trying to have a baby suddenly realize why isn't this working? And it turns out that it's endometriosis. So I've backed into understanding it. And it's just it's a frustrating disease. It's a chronic disease. It happens every month. And there's just not a lot of research. But prostaglandins, which are hormone-like substances that moderate the contraction and relaxation of your muscles, are part of what cause cramps. CBD can inhibit the enzyme that creates those. And so it can really go to the source of the pain. And that's what it does for me. CBD is like magic. I mean, I have spent years taking different drugs to try and moderate the pain, where you're just, lying in a ball, full body sweat, just such intense pain. I was in labor with my son for 13 hours, and the first 10 were not that different from a bad month for me. So it's really, really intense. And now I take CBD, and basically I can manage the pain. I still have endometriosis. I will have endometriosis, but I think anyone with a chronic condition, and you can probably relate to this with sleep issues, there's so much anxiety about not knowing how you're going to react, or is this month going to be the bad one when I have to be out doing things, and so CBD just gives me a lot more comfort and confidence that I am going to be able to get through it. And so it's incredible. I don't even need to use THC. CBD alone works for me. I take it in an oil tincture, or suppositories are incredibly effective. You put them in before you put a tampon in, and lay on your bed for 10 or 15 minutes, because it's a solid. It looks like an applicator-less tampon, and in your body it turns into a liquid. It's like coconut oil, often MCT oil. That is extremely effective for pain and lasts for a long time. For extreme pain, I have a CBD vape pen that I can take, and the pain will go away within minutes. So there are a lot of helpful solutions. It's different for everyone, but CBD and cannabis in general are really, really promising treatments for endometriosis.
Yeah, that's such a great, explanation, and thank you for that, because that really, it's such a wide variety of things that could be. Because I was thinking, like, when you said leg pain, I'm like, oh, that's me. Like when I get my period cramps, it's straight in my legs, and it's so interesting. And I love that you brought up CBD, because we haven't like taken a deep dive into CBD too much on the podcast. But I think that it's so important, because I had a doctor come on, and she was an OBGYN actually. And she did say, she was like, CBD is something that you should be taking like a supplement. Like you should be taking it every day. Like you can take a vitamin. And I've recently started to take like a tincture every day. Cause I love THC. Me and THC are real good friends. But me and CBD are becoming really good friends too, because now I'm just like, well, now I need my CBD, because the effects of CBD kind of last longer, and they just, it really gets in deep. So I love that you brought up CBD as an option. And I really hope that our audience takes away and understands that, there are so many options with cannabis, right? Like you don't have to smoke it. I talk about smoking a lot because that's just my preferred method. Hence is probably why I have bronchitis right now. But CBD is such a great alternative for, just is such a great way to take something that you can have every day, not have to worry about feeling high, or getting that, having that feeling of getting too high, or whatever, people kind of feel with THC. And CBD actually will bring you down. So if you are too high, you are on too much you do have too much THC in your body, CBD will bring you back down and balance you out. So I highly encourage all of our listeners here to explore the powers of CBD, like really look into, and you can even smoke CBD. I'm like, that doesn't even exclude it from the smoking conversation if that's your preferred method, because I have seen people who do smoke CBD, or you talked about your CBD vape. I had this one vape that is, a 1-to-1 THC CBD, and it's great for sleep, because the THC part for me is what helps me with easing the anxiety of sleep. Like you were saying, like, I do have still like that anxiety of laying in bed and feeling like, oh, like beating myself up, like, am I going to be able to sleep tonight? Oh my God, I can't sleep. I can't sleep. But really, like the THC giving me that euphoric feeling helps me to put that at ease until I do fall asleep. So I love that you gave us like, a great rundown of how we can use CBD and all of that. And this, I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because I think, in June, we talked about all about like rest. I mean, July, we talked all about rest for growth. And I think that this is a point where we as women need to check in with ourselves, right? We need to take that time to stop and just say, okay, these period cramps that I've been dealing with for so long, and I know how to deal with it. I have my Tylenol, I have my ritual, right, of all the things I use to help me to go on and have to show up. Because, like you were saying, we still have to show up regardless of what's going on. And so it's really eye-opening, and I really appreciate having this conversation for sure. And I think everybody will take so much away from all of this information. And so how does what advice, I guess, do you have for women out there who are like, okay, I'm taking note of these symptoms that I have. What am I like now? Where do I go from here? Like, do I go to a dispensary? Do I go online and buy CBD? Like, where do I start if I think that I might have some, reproductive kind of issues that I want to actually treat with cannabis?
Well, I take a soft gel, it looks just like the soft gels that you can buy at the pharmacy. And it's a women-owned company based in Chicago called Equilibria that I really love. And I do use CBD like a supplement. I take it, it helps me sleep. I never had any sleep issues, but when my son was born and I started my business, he would wake up in the middle of the night and then my mind would race. And so I don't have any trouble falling asleep, but I would wake up. And so starting to take CBD, just 25 milligrams soft gel right before bed was incredible for me and really allowed me to sleep and feel rested, even if I didn't get quite as much sleep as I wanted. I feel like every single show on our podcast, I have to say, this is when you have to experiment. But that's still where we are with cannabis. As a Schedule I drug, there just are not a lot of research studies. There is some research, and there's a lot of research coming out of other countries. Canada has legal cannabis now. Israel has a lot of research. And so if you are considering cannabis for a condition, I definitely recommend that you try to do some research in advance. There's a doctor based in New York named June Chin. Her website has a lot of really great resources and basically every study that exists from around the globe. And I've shared that with a lot of people who have found it really helpful, because what you're finding is not having, regulated studies done by NIH or some other body means that it's just a smaller sample size. And so there are studies, they just exist, are with fewer people. And so cannabis right now is small studies and anecdotal evidence. And that is so many women are being helped, men too. I mean, so many people are being helped by cannabis. That's the reason you're seeing this massive legalization wave, because people are just realizing this is medicine. A lot of other reasons as well, but I think that's a big one. So I would say do your research, listen to our podcast. This is what we are trying to provide, a voice where, we take this so seriously, and sharing information, making sure that we have experts, that the women's stories are have context, so you understand, the research that we did to try and figure this out, and who we talked to and why. And it's so important to me that people really feel like they are getting the full picture. And I am certainly pro cannabis. I just can't not be. I feel like it's one of those things that once you've experienced it, it helps me so much. So listen to our podcast, and you can always reach out to us. We can reach out to the experts. There are cannabis experts out there who are nurses and doctors and have training that many of us are more familiar with, and talk to them. And I get a lot of questions about talking to your doctor about cannabis, and there are a couple things that you need to think about. First, you live in a legal state, because that is really going to matter. If you live in a medical state, that's going to matter. You can have a different relationship with your doctor. But more and more doctors, I really believe, are starting to pay attention to cannabis. And I think that a lot of the reason that they may not know about it is because it is a huge piece of information to learn. I mean, I
Mhm.
think we both can attest to the fact that we have learned so much,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they have a full-time job already that isn't cannabis. So, it's try and talk to your doctor. If you have a doctor who, then the women on my show say this all the time, they go to their doctors, they are try and be honest about what's happening with them. But if your doctor just really isn't willing to hear what you have to say after you phrased it like, okay, cannabis helps me with X. I want to continue getting helped with X. Do you think this is like what do you recommend? Really kind of putting it out objectively, not just saying like, oh, what do you think of weed? Being clear. You might need to find another doctor.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's such a great point. This kind of like start with research. That's one of the things I believe in, and I try to tell my audience is to be intentional, right? Like understand how the plant works for one, how understand how it, and then figure out and then experiment to see how it works in your body because it impacts us so differently. And I think I remember, being on the other side of not being a cannabis user because I think that I started using cannabis fairly recently in comparison to some other people I've talked to who used it for a very, very long time. And I remember kind of just, being in that place of saying like, well, I'm not anti-weed. I just don't know it will help me with anything. So I think that, starting with research is so important because then you can see other people's stories, right? Like that's the beautiful thing I think about the cannabis industry is that everybody has a story as to how cannabis has impacted their life and that story tells why they're continuing to use it, right? Like, for me, it started with sleep and then I grew into be a pothead, right? Like I started just as, like, okay, I'm going to smoke. I'm going to lay down. I'm just going to keep my weed in my drawer. Like nobody sees it, and then I just was like, oh my goodness, this helps me so much. I need to tell everybody. I need to just tell everybody about it. And so so I think that that's great. Great advice is to definitely start with research. Definitely start with checking out how to do the pot and learning from the experts and stuff that they have because they have a lot of great information about like practical advice, research, all that kind of stuff. So I think that's so great. And so I want to kind of switch gears a little bit because we've been talking a lot about like, cannabis and the health issues. And then on this podcast, we also talk about self-care. So self-care is our big thing. So I would love for you to talk about how do you make time for self-care as a mom and as a busy businesswoman and in this ever-changing, ever-growing industry, how do you make time for your self-care?
The pandemic has been hard. It really has.
Mhm.
I live in an apartment in the city, and San Francisco, I think, has been the most locked down place in all of
Yeah,
America.
it
So
has.
we have really,
You guys
really
have
been,
fires. You have so much going on in San Francisco.
yeah, we've really been contained. And I think that what I've learned about, I am an introvert, so like, my energy is recharged by being by myself. I have not had a lot of space by myself, and I've been really aware of that depleting me more quickly. I've had a meditation practice for 13 years, and it's one of my most favorite things that I've ever done for myself. And I do guided meditation. Sometimes it's 5 minutes, sometimes it's 30 minutes. But I believe that meditation has absolutely transformed my life and my relationship to anxiety and just knowing myself and knowing the cues that I should be listening to so that I can be the best version of myself and bring the best to all the people around me. So that is an extremely important part of my life. One of the reasons I love living in San Francisco is the access to nature. That's also a huge part of what helps me to, it's funny, sometimes I'll be on a hike and I almost feel like my head is one of those robots where like you just lift off the top and everything just goes out
Just
into the
comes out.
trees. And then when I finish the hike, I'm like, oh, I feel better. So I think that nature, meditation, sleep is really important as well. There are weekends when I take a nap instead of doing anything else because I know that anything else I do is going to be at, 25 to 50% if I don't just get some rest first. So it's hard. I'm busy. Having a baby and being a mom it is a very big job. My son is amazing, but it's been a big year. I think there's some years that are sort of learning years and other years that are more doing years. And I've been doing a bit of both this year. I'm hoping that things will settle down a little bit as we reopen, and I just have access to some of the things that I know help me, yoga, swimming, that I just haven't really been able to do during the pandemic.
Yeah, it's definitely been a tough time. And like, I want to give a big shout out to all the moms out there, because I know y'all are stressed. And it is like, I have a nephew. I get him on Fridays, and he drives me insane in the best of ways. He's a toddler. He's almost 2, so he's just like in everything. So God bless the moms out there, sending y'all all the love and energy. And that's why we all our moms out here, we definitely need, and I encourage cannabis use for moms. Because before my nephew comes over, I'm like, okay, y'all, I'm gonna go smoke first. I'll be right up as soon as they're on their way. I'm like, okay, let me go smoke now. So I'm freshly baked when he gets here. And we just have such a good, better time. So I really, really hope that all moms can, indulge in self-care, indulge in cannabis, and use those things together to really help. And I love that you have a meditation practice. I love meditation as well. That's one of my favorite things to do. I have built my meditation into my morning routine, and, I smoke, I do my meditation, and it really kind of helps to, helps you with mindfulness, it helps you with anxiety, it helps you to deal with like just getting in touch with who you are as a person, and getting in touch with yourself, and feeling grounded. And because I think sometimes all of the stresses of life, and we are always going in so many different directions, that we really don't feel grounded. We don't feel within ourselves, right? Especially when you have like pain going on within your body and so many different things that you have going on. Like, it's so important to really like ground within yourself and say like, I am here, I am a person, I am alive, I am on the ground, I am in control of my destiny, I'm in control of my future. So love that. So this has been such a great conversation. It's been so awesome. I think that I've just for sure learned so much. I have so many notes. I know our audience has learned so much. So thank you so much for coming on the show. So I would love for you to tell the audience what's coming up for you, what's coming up for How to Do the Pod, and let us know how we can connect with you online.
Thank you. Well, this has been great, and I really appreciate you having me on. One other just extra tip for moms: if you use cannabis, you don't get hungover versus alcohol.
Yes,
which is really, really helpful.
Yeah.
So weed is great for moms. What is coming up next for us? We are starting a new series that is going to be dropping. Our first one came this week, about growing weed at home. We got a lot of questions about it, and I've talked to some amazing women growers who give us great tips. If that's something that you're interested in doing, and even if you're not interested, the stories that these women have, like I said, I live in an apartment. I have a 3-year-old, and it's been COVID, so I'm not growing weed at home because it is a big project, but I just have loved learning about the plant. And sometimes I live in California, and so it's a legal state with beautiful packaging, and you can kind of, crazily enough, sort of forget it's a plant sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
so it's been a really fun way to reconnect with that. We also have some shows about cooking with weed, if that's something that your audience is into. And we have some sleep episodes. As I said, we're going to be sharing your story. I'm really excited about that. And the series that we started a little bit ago, that has been so popular, is actually, we call it The First Time I Bought Legal Weed. And women share their stories with us. And it can be a scary, hard, weird, funny, confusing, exciting, inspiring thing. And women share all of those emotions through their stories. So the episodes are really short. They come out on Thursdays. They're usually between like 2 and 5 minutes. And it's just a fun way to hear somebody's perspective. And if you are in that period that you described, like you're curious about cannabis, but you haven't sort of taken that first step, I think these stories are so helpful to just hear in women's own voices. A lot of women are afraid. A lot of women don't feel confident, but you just kind of, just do it, because it's worth seeing if cannabis works for you, because you can really decide how you want to bring it into your life. But I just feel like it is a medicinal plant, and it can help with a lot of things that are very specific to women's lives.
Love that. And I love that series, because it's like we were talking about going into the dispensary for the first time. I remember when I took my sister to the dispensary for the first time, and when I was living in Las Vegas, and we went in there, and she just was like, wow, this is just so nice. And I just was like, yeah, I think people think like, it looks like a smoke shop. Like they're picturing like a smoke shop type thing, like a little seedy, back of the alley with a bunch of pipes and stuff outside. Like when I went to the dispensary for the first time, it was I was super extra. I asked 1,000 questions to the bud tender. So thank you to this bud tender who literally answered 1,000 of my questions, because I had already done some research online. Like I'm like one of those patients where like I go on WebMD and then like see like what it says, and then I go to the doctor and says, well, this is what I found. Can you validate any of this information? And so that's kind of how it was when I first went. And he was like, oh yeah, for sleep we recommend indica strains, and you can try these. These are great. And I was like, oh, okay, well, he was like, oh, they're like sativa, indica hybrid, and they have all these different things. I said, well, give me one of each, because I need to know, like, I need to try all of these things. I need to really like, let's dig in here and see how this actually is going to work. So I love that you had that series, because it can be intimidating for sure. So I love that your platform really helps women to understand it, like, and it's fun, it's playful, right? We do the pod, it's audio first. So it's really great to just listen to on the go and stuff like that. And you have some really, really great content there. So I so appreciate you coming on the show. Make sure you guys check out Ellen on how to do the pod. And I will also make sure we have all the links in the show notes. Head over to maryzeal.com if you want to see the show notes, and we'll have information about Ellen and what she has going on and all her series and stuff coming up. And all the resources that we mentioned, I have made sure I took some notes about the resources that you've mentioned here. So definitely head over to maryzeal.com, y'all. But thanks again, Ellen. I'm so excited to continue to talk with you, in the future about some other things that we have going on. So thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you so much.
Well, that's a wrap on another episode. Thanks so much for listening. If you got a nugget of information or inspiration from this episode, here are 5 ways you can support the podcast. You can buy me a coffee at buyme5coffee.com/high-on-self-care to send your token of appreciation. You can shop Mary Zeal's favorite things. This is a list of products that we love and have actually tried over at maryzeal.com. And some of these products contain affiliate links that give us a kickback when you shop their site at no cost to you. You can leave us a review on your podcast app of choice. If you are listening on the web, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review on the podcast app of choice. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, all the places. 4th, you can share the podcast with 3 friends that you think will benefit from all the nuggets that we drop. And lastly, you can join my email list to get episodes sent to you weekly and learn about all the fun new things we have coming up on maryzeal.com and the podcast. All the links are in the description. And I will catch you on the next episode.